Alright, so how's it going? My name is Hab, you already know that. However, I have been very much delayed on making videos as of late. Of course, my state is a little bit different than usual, but I did figure that since a really big rebalance is coming to it, and once again, this nightmare never ends apparently, I figured I might as well assemble a quick tier list before the rebalance actually happens, and then, you know, we might reform that one. So, as always, the tier lists that I do are graded from S to F, and then there's also a did not play section. In the did not play section this time I'm also going to include the VK90 and the WZ5A, because even though I owned them on my account previously, I have not played them for a very long time, so I would not be able to form a coherent opinion on them. So, without further ado, again, I have to state that this is just my opinion. So if you feel that I have personally slighted you with one of my tank choices, don't take it too seriously, keep it to yourself. But some actual discourse would be pretty neat to have in the comments. Also, you have to excuse my voice because I've been coming down with something fierce, and currently the only thing that I'm able to drink without retching or coughing violently is coffee. So I'm powered by coffee today, is what I mean to say. Anyway, this is also gonna have a lot less editing than my usual videos, if any at all. However, I do believe that we have to start off from the top and go to the bottom. So, the Sheridan. I don't really like the Sheridan that much, however, the whole line of the Sheridan is actually quite decent, and in general, the Sheridan does not really struggle with penetration once you press the 2 key. The Sheridan is just very mobile. It has that ridiculously trollish armor profile where I have bounced so many shots as of late. So, with that alpha buff that is coming to it next patch, I believe that this is absolutely a B tier tank. The thing that is absolutely holding it back is simply the fact that the damage output is just not very good. You do have the alpha, but the reload just simply isn't there. You have to rely a lot on your ammo usage, and you also have to rely a lot on, like, setting people on fire or exploiting them, which, you know, granted, that's something that you should do on a light tank anyway. Chieftain and Badger are going to be pretty easy, because I did not play them. The Chieftain changes in the next patch are probably some of the most baffling ones I have seen. I understand that Wargaming wants to give every tier 10 Hesh for some reason in the British Tech 3, however, with the Chieftain, giving it Hesh actually kills it off, because the Chieftain as a heavy tank is pretty static. It kind of needs to, you know, have a good combat fallback, such as, you know, having premium penetration and going through a tank that is opposing it at that time. With the Hesh, that means that that simply isn't going to happen. With the Badger, I'm afraid I can't really say anything on the matter. Next up, we actually have a very interesting one. This is the WZ132-1, that's the tier 10 Chinese light tank. I got it recently, and I gotta say I really like it, so the buffs that are coming to it I think are gonna make it an easy A, almost S. Even in its current state, the 1321 is very good. I do feel that the buffs that it is getting are kind of valid, but it's also gonna basically kill the bad chat dead in water, unless you really like the bad chat. Which, like, sure, with all of the nerfs, the bad chat is still going to be an absolutely viable light tank. If anything, it was kind of overcooked. However, you know, it's still a little bit weird seeing a light tank get this much of a glow up, but we'll get to another light tank soon enough. The BZ75, I'm afraid I can't give you a coherent opinion on, I don't really have it yet. However, it does not instill me with confidence seeing those stats on Blitzkit and everywhere else, so for the time being, it's going to be in the didn't play part. Next up, the Bad Chat. I have to say, in its current state, is an easy S tier. The Bad Chat has an excellent damage output, it's consistent, it moves great, and as if that wasn't enough, you also have a spall liner in case you get somebody nasty aiming at you with a bunch of Hesh or high-penning high explosive. It is just good. It's just really, really good. The only thing that is arguably holding the Bad Chat down a little is the gun depression, but that has been a constant for every single French-lized tank in the line, so it's not that big of a deal, really. The Bad Chat's 3-shot 350 Alpha drum is just really good, and it's almost too good to give up. Speaking of too good, the Foch 155 is not really it. With that patch and the buff that it's going to get the next update, I do really feel that the Foch is gonna come into a zone of its own, but as of right now, for me, it's easily a C tier. I just don't feel that it is consistent right now. It moves well, the armor is decently trollish, but the gun just does not output that great. Whether it's due to the alpha, one can really just speculate, but for me the Foch is just not consistent, so I'm very interested to see how it will handle after the patch. The Caro and the STRVK are pretty easy, did not play, but I don't understand the further nerfs that are coming to the STRV, and I... excuse me. As much as I understand Wargaming nerfing some tanks, I really don't understand the nerf on the Caro. Nerfing a gun depression is something that you should never do, so it's a little bit baffling to see the Caro get hit like that. Anyway, time for some American tanks. So we have the T-57, and the T-57, after all of the changes and balances that it went through alongside all the other tanks at tier 10, it's still a really easy B tier. The T-57 might even be considered an A tier, just due to how consistent the autoloader is. The reload, not too bad, the alpha, pretty good, penetration, pretty good, and again, accuracy, pretty good. Even it even has like a slightly trillish turret armor. So, in general, the T-57 is a really good autoloader. And even after the update hits, it's still gonna remain good. So if you're on the line and you're kind of on the fence and you're going, oh, do I really want to get this? Especially considering how many nerfs are coming next patch. Yeah, I'd say it's still worth getting. It's a really good heavy tank. Not really in terms of tanking damage, but you know what I mean. Next up we have the E4. And the E4 is a little bit conflicting, because I personally always liked the E4 a lot. However, in its current state, it is a little bit weird, because there is absolutely no reason to take the E4 over a 268 if you just simply want a tank destroyer. If you want a tank destroyer with a turret, that changes things somewhat. For me, the E4 is a B tier. A lot of people I asked regarding the E4 have said that it's a C or a D tier for them, but for me, it just simply seems to kind of work. The fact that it has 630 alpha instead of 640 is a bit of a bummer, and the fact that it has APCR instead of AP as its regular ammo is also quite annoying, I might say. But in general, I can't really be too upset with the E4. Sometimes it soaks up damage, the cupola is now way smaller, and in general it just seems to work way better. One thing that I'm always just a big proponent of on the E4 is that it should have gotten more gun depression than the E3, but alas, that's the kind of world we live in, so we'll have to keep the E4 at B tier for the time being. Whether or not the buffs will affect it in any significant way, I can't really say. I don't really remember them from the top of my head, but sandbag armor is something it never needed. Speaking of more American tanks, the E5 immediate S tier. I have played it so much in the last couple of days, and the E5 just works now. I remember during one of the last rebalances I marked it off as a D or even F tier, but with the changes that it got, I honestly can't argue with it anymore. The gun is consistent, the damage output a little bit iffy, but it's very much workable, the mobility is decent, and the turret armor is great. The hull armor takes a little bit of a hit, but in exchange the turret armor is really, really good, so this is a very good hull down heavy. It's very consistent in that regard, and the gun also performs quite well. For me, it's really hard to rank it anything else than S tier. If you want a heavy tank that will do its job on most of the maps, this is genuinely just one of them. It just works. That's how one genius from Bethesda would say it. Anyway, that's it for the Americans for the time being, and now we have the T-62A. I was never that big on the T62A actually, so seeing the fact that it's getting nerfed even harder next patch is a little bit disheartening. However, for me, the 62A is still kind of a B tier. It's honestly not bad in its current shape. It has that really weird armor profile where the upper plate is just genuinely, I think, too good. The turret with the PBR remodel looks kind of whack, because I don't think it really should look like that, but, you know, we kinda have to live with it. But 330 Alpha on a Russian tank like that is really interesting. The fact that it's getting its shell speed basically cut in half is baffling, though, so we shall see how it handles after the patch, but I can't imagine it will handle better. Speaking of things that might handle better, the IS-4. The IS-4 is my most played tier 10 heavy tank by a mile. I always played it in tournaments. For me, this was just a very tournament-heavy tank. However, with those sharp armor nerfs it received and the mobility buffs, because Wargaming thought, oh hey, the IS-4, a tank that is notoriously very heavy in real life, is now going to become a heavium. And I understand where they're going with this, however, there is one small problem, and that is that the soft stats for terrain on the IS-4 are absolute garbage. So even with all of those mobility buffs it received, it doesn't move that well. So during the past couple of days I have played the IS-4 a lot to see if my opinion on it has changed, because a couple of people that I asked have mentioned that the IS-4 is kind of alright to play right now. And I was originally going to place it at D or maybe even F tier, but for me, as it is right now, the IS-4 is a high C tier. Almost B tier. Almost, but not quite. The turret armor is still great, the gun is still very nice, it works well, but the turret just does not turn. The tank itself kind of turns a little bit weird, and in general the armor on the hull is now just quite poor, even against tier 9s, which is a little bit shocking. It getting some of its hull armor back next patch is a little bit questionable, because if you wanna go in all in on that heavium playstyle, you might as well just buff the mobility a little bit further, buff some of the soft stats. But in exchange it's getting most of its armor back, so I don't really understand how that's gonna work. If anything, I feel that might overcook the IS-4 a little, but again, we shall see. Next up, speaking of overcooked, the 268 Absolute S tier. I have played the 268 a lot, and to say that right now it is the best tier 10 tank destroyer would be an understatement. The 268 is a bona fide assault tank destroyer, and the fact that it performs so absurdly well in that role is just impressive to me. 690 alpha, barely 13 seconds of reload time, great penetration, very decent accuracy, great mobility all things considered, and the armor profile is not too terrible either. And again, you also have gun depression, you can point the gun down on a Russian tank, for once. So the 268 is really worth getting, and even with the nerfs that it's getting, it will still remain really good at that one function. It will still be a really good assault TD. So I don't really think that those nerfs are gonna impact it that much, so for me it will probably remain at S tier. This is absolutely one of my favorite tier 10s. It still works beautifully. The Leopard is gonna be a little conflicting, however. In its current state, I would absolutely give it an A tier. The Leopard moves great, moves fantastic, has a fantastic gun, great damage output, great accuracy. But I feel Wargaming is going a little bit too hard on it. Now, we have seen the announcement that they have changed and reconsidered some of the changes on the Leopard 1. But I still feel that those nerfs are not that well deserved. The Leopard is still a very high skill ceiling tank, it's why I perform like absolute garbage, and that's why I'm not very good in the Leopard. However, if you get to exploit that mobility, the gun depression, and that beautiful gun, you can make wonders. However, that just does not happen often, so I can't really remember if Wargaming is still intending to nerf the gun depression on it. If they will, it's going to hurt the Leopard significantly, because that just cuts off another degree of terrain that it could perform on. So, as it is right now, the Leopard is a very tentative A tier. We shall see after the patch hits. Next up, the VK72, and for me this is always kind of like an unsung hero, kind of ignored in the garage, because I was never that big of a fan in it. However, after some reconsideration, it has to be an A tier. It gets tungsten, so the 600 alpha is not that big of a deal a lot of the time. The reload right now is still fine. I feel that Wargaming is going to nerf it a little bit too hard, but considering the fact that it's getting a PBR model, I guess that's some give and take. I honestly, against people who don't really understand the VK72's weak spots, this thing performs a little bit too well. Really, that low overplayed basically makes sure that a lot of people have to actually fire a Pramo at it. And if you face them dead on, really the only weak spots that you have are those turret sides and kind of the turret basket a little bit, but those don't get hit that much. So for me, the VK72 is an A tier easily, but I probably still won't play it much. I think the rebalance will make it a little bit less prominent in tournaments at least. God, I hope, especially considering what Wargaming has considered to be a good idea with some of these heavy tanks. M454 Super Conqueror. But also, STB. The STB is one of my favorite tanks in the entire game. That gun depression just makes it so versatile on terrain. But it's not an S tier. And that is really simple, and the reason why is that the damage output just suffers. Wargaming decided that, like, hey, this kind of needs an alpha nerf, which I did not agree with. 330 alpha, I think, is a little bit too harsh considering what this delivers to the plate. So, you know, a little bit of a reload buff would have been appreciated. Unfortunately, it's getting a reload nerf, it's getting a Pramo penetration nerf, and it's also getting a bit of a mobility nerf, so I think the STB is gonna easily go down a tier or two once the next patch hits. The STB is gonna suffer a little bit. Really, its only great advantage is that it can just point its gun down better than anyone else at the tier. But it's just a little bit hard. I really love it, but I can't put it into S tier. That's basically how it is. Next up, we have the 121. And the 121 is really interesting. For some reason, it has tungsten. For some reason. I don't think it never or ever really needed tungsten. It's really conflicting. The gun is beautiful when you get it to work, but compared to the other Chinese mediums that I have played, I for some odd reason just can't enjoy the 121 as much. Whether it's because it's just wide as hell and that just kind of screws with me, I really cannot say, but for me the 121 is a high B tier. The gun performs beautifully, it moves well, and the turret still holds up pretty decently, but all things considered, the 121B for me just isn't that great of a tier 10 medium. With the balance changes, I feel it's going to suffer a little bit more, so again, we shall see, but I don't think it's gonna stay in B tier for much longer. The 5A I mentioned at the start, we aren't unfortunately touching that, and we're not touching the 30B either, although I don't understand why the 30B is getting the spoiler either. I never really fire HE on a 30B all that much. Anyway, next up, we have the Pregido 65, and as it may be with the equipment changes that we have had recently, the Pregido 65 is a high B tier. The gun genuinely performs decent enough now, to the point where you might actually call it a little bit consistent. The hull armor, again, still trollish as all hell, and it doesn't move too bad and it can point the gun down. So the fact that Wargaming has decided to nerf all of those factors is baffling. Nerfing the gun depression, again, as I said, absolute last resort, never do it. I don't even think the Pregido really deserves a nerf at this stage. It's already got so much bad treatment in the past, so once that patch hits, the Pregido is gonna easily be a C, maybe even D tier, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but, you know, what can you do? Excuse me. Next up, the concept. Again, I don't have it. Maybe next year, unless they decide to change the 10-year revolt tank. But again, as it is right now, I don't really feel that the concept is struggling, at least from what I've seen on the opposing teams. Next up we have the Kranvan, and my issue with the Kranvan is really simple. It is incredibly incredibly boring. I have always just been bored to tears when I played the Granvan. It's a good hold down heavy. And that is it. That is it. You can't really perform in many other spots. Like, you go hold down in this, and there's not that many things that can actually go through you. So, in terms of actual effectiveness, the Granvan is a B tier easily, almost an A tier, because the gun is kind of consistent, but it just has a poor damage output. It just reloads for long. But it's incredibly boring. Next up, I think we have our first F tier, and that's the Minotaur. So, the Minotaur is really strange, because if it got any, like, additional buffs, it would easily be elevated to a B tier. So this is just kind of one of those tanks that relies all in on its armor profile, kind of like the 2684. So, it's a little bit weird. I'm sorry for pausing, I had a little bit of a coughing fit. Anyway. Back to the Minotaur. The thing is that if it's gonna get buffs, it's gonna easily get elevated as several tiers higher. The thing is, that armor is an absolute zero-sum game. It's kind of like the T28 at tier 8, where if the enemy has the penetration to go through, they will always go through. And the Minotaur is getting its hull armor nerfed. Now, I understand that. The hull armor is a little bit ridiculous. I feel that it definitely did deserve an adjustment, but for me, I feel that the Minotaur should have gotten an adjustment for the turret buff in exchange, that the turret should have been a little bit better. Because the Minotaur is absolutely a defensive TD, all things considered. It can point its gun down really well. It has a good burst output. But the accuracy is garbage, the mobility is poor, and again, zero-sum game with the armor. For some reason, Wargaming decided that this needed an interclip booster. They have decided to, you know, go back on that idea, probably because it was completely pointless for the Minotaur, but again, it's a little bit baffling. So, as it is right now, the Minotaur is gonna be an F tier, and even with the adjustments that are coming, it's still going to stay an F tier. That's just how it is for me. I feel that it is an awful tier 10 to play, especially in the current meta. Next up, we have the M48 pattern, and the M48, as much as I like it, has to be in B tier for me right now. For some odd reason, Wargaming decided, hey, this needs different alpha than a 350, which, okay. I mean, it still performs, it's just that it's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. I don't remember how the rest of the sentence goes, but hey. You understand what I'm getting at, right? The M48 pattern is not exactly a fantastic performer. It will perform well enough in most places that you put it in, but it will not perform great in any of those spots. And then we have the O. I don't think this is gonna surprise anybody, because immediate S tier. That 120 mil is just ludicrous when you pair it up with the reticle calibration, so I understand Wargaming nerfing the 120 mil's aim time. What I don't understand is Wargaming nerfing the 105's aim time as well, because it kind of needs that consistency. The 120 mil was always kind of more like a fun gun, like, watch me remove this tier 10's health. But the 105 was always like, hey, I need to like get my shots out consistently, and I don't really need reticle cal. With that one, I can just use an interclip booster or something. Doesn't even get an interclip booster. Anyway, you can tell that I've been playing with the 120 a lot, so alas, that's how the cookie crumbles. Once it gets those rebalances, it's still gonna be very potent, but it's not gonna be an S tier, it's probably gonna be an A tier. But again, it deserved the 120 nerf, but it did not deserve the 105 nerf. So we shall see how it's gonna perform, especially compared to the VZ55. Next up we have the E3. And those that know me that I'm very, very biased against the E3. I never liked it. See, the thing is for me that the E3 just does not perform. I don't understand why, but it just doesn't. It has the alpha, the mobility is not terrible all things considered, and the armor is silly enough. However, once people see your lower plate, it's basically all over. With the E3, it's kind of like a similar story where it performs a little bit better at range, but the thing is, the gun just does not. So it's kind of in that awful awful middle spot where you kind of have to be close up to like help your allies, but you can't really go front line, if you understand what I'm saying. So, again, for me, it's just a D tier right now. The rebalancing, I have absolutely no idea if it's gonna do anything to it for me when I looked at the notes. During the time that I was having a coughing fit anyway, I looked at it and kind of decided, nah, it won't really impact it that much. It might bring it to C tier, but that's about it. So, that's it for the Americans, for this time at least. And now, the Object 140. This one's gonna be really contentious because I like the 140 a lot. It moves great, the gun is consistent, but really the biggest fallback that it has right now is that it has 300 alpha. So the fact that it's getting its free 10 alpha back next patch is really great. There's not really much to say about the 140. The armor is not that great, and the mobility is basically the thing that is making it work. Just a low profile Russian medium tank. Basically how it goes. So, A tier for me, simple as that. Then we have the IS-7, and the IS-7 has gotten a couple of nerfs in the past, and it's getting a couple more. I'm not happy about them, because always for me the IS-7 was kind of a... Shall we just say a fast heavy, where it made kind of sense for it to not turn that great. And then they nerfed the top speed and adjusted the traverse figures, so it now kind of moves, like, it kind of turns better, but it doesn't move as great. And now, like, as much as I want to say it, it's still gonna be a very low A tier. Very low A tier. It borderlines on B. Those adjustments are not gonna help it. I understand the lower plate nerf, because the lower plate was always a little bit silly. But they really should not touch the mobility in exchange. So, as it is right now, IS-7, A tier. Then we have the 263. And the 263 is a guilty pleasure of mine, but in the current meta it is absolutely a niche option. Some maps it will just never perform on. Never. Like, you get this thing on the mines and you're done for. You're gonzo. So, really the 263 just... is kind of having a bad deal handed over to it. So, I can't really say anything more on the subject. Unfortunately, the fact that it's getting another track traverse nerf is unfortunate, because it kind of needs the track traverse actually, so I'll play it for a bit once the patch hits, but I am not expecting great things. KPZ50T did not play, and the VK, even though I had it previously, I haven't played it in a long enough time, so I can't give you a coherent opinion. T100. Oh boy. So, in the next patch it's gonna be elevated to nearly the levels that it was at release. And I like light tanks getting buffed in this balance change, but I'm not sure if the T100 needed it that much. The only thing that the T100 really needed adjusting was the damage output, because the reload time is just not that great considering the gun. But, as it is right now, it's still a very good light tank. It moves great, has those tracer shells, which are surprisingly convenient actually. So, right now the T100 is in a very good spot outside the damage output, where you actually have to kind of think about, do I want to give this the rammer or do I want to give this calibrated? So, it's a little bit weird in that regard. Anyway, low A tier for me. Next up the 4202, and I'm biased. I am biased. I love the 105mm hash. If you have seen the video on the channel before, you understand why. I feel that the PBR model is absolutely hideous, however, it is nowhere near accurate, and I absolutely have no idea where they got that model from anyway. Wargaming goes to Tankfest every single year. Was it that big of a problem to go into the Vehicle Conservation Center and just take a couple pictures of the 4202? Like, come on. But no, really, the 4202 moves great, has a trollish armor profile still, and the gun is beautiful. Like, what's not to like? Well, probably the fact that if you run the Hesh gun, you're a little bit more limited in your combat fallbacks. That is about it. So, again, for me, S tier, because I'm biased. 183, I don't have a 183 tier, so I'm just gonna place it in the middle. No matter what you do to it, it's still gonna be a 183 in the end. When it hits really hard. So the fact that it has these kind of, like, the fact that it has this lack of fallbacks, I guess, is understandable. A little bit. I understand people who go like, oh, but I really like the 183, and yeah, it's fun to absolutely like nuke somebody for half or even 2/3 of their health. But you have to understand, if this got a buff, people would riot. This got a nerf, and people rioted anyway as well, so it's in a really awful spot in that regard. So that seems to be most of the Brits done. I'm seeing the 2 and 5B and 4 below 5 at the bottom, so we'll get to them in a little bit. Next up, the Type 71. And I don't like the Type 71, okay? Because for me, it's just kind of too sluggish. Even with the equipment, I just prefer to use the gun depression equipment, because gun depression is great. So, as it is right now, Type 71, high B tier. High B tier. I cannot argue that it is just effective. It just works. The fact that it's getting the Pramo adjusted a little bit in the next patch, even better for it. I kind of understand the reload nerf in that case, so it makes sense. The premium AP as it is right now is really good as is, so if you're kind of on the fence about the Type 71, I'd say give it a try. But if you're not impressed, then, you know, no harm done, really. Most of us collect titans anyway. Because, you know, it's kind of the end of the line, you kind of want it to stay around in your garage. Anyway, 121B. As it is right now, high B tier, probably the top of B tier. Once it gets those changes, it's probably going to be an S tier. Because the 121B, in terms of all of the updates, is the one that just does not suffer. It's the one that's getting buffed. So, it's confusing. It's a little bit baffling, but that's just how it is. Previously, it was kind of a little bit weird in that it was kind of 140-esque, and now that just isn't the case, because the 140 just now has no armor. So the 121B is getting more armor, and the gun will still perform very well. So, as it is right now, high B tier for me. I don't play it nearly as much as I should. Maybe that will change with the update. Next up, the 114 SP2, and I'm gonna mark it as did not play. However, I can really easily tell you that in its current state, it's just not good. However, this is one of the balance nodes that I will genuinely agree with. The 114 SP2 is getting a turret armor buff. The sides are getting buffed by 10 mil, and the front is getting buffed by 10 mil. The front getting buffed by 10, not that important, because already it gets like 330, 340 effective, so I'd say that's like enough in that regard. However, the sides getting buffed were absolutely important, because a lot of the time they were actually just weaker than the front in terms of effective armor if you faced somebody dead on. So that's a buff that it absolutely deserves, but outside that, it's still probably going to be a worse E100, so it's a little bit of a rough deal, especially if you bought it in the crates. Like a few people I know. So anyway, the 50B. 50B is really weird. I loved it before, and then when it got its 4 shells, I kind of started to hate it. However, I can't argue that it still, like, you know, works. It still works great. It moves great. The armor profile kind of non-existent nowadays, but for some other reason it has reactive armor. And the damage output still easily keeps it in B tier. The consistency of getting those shots out and actually hitting someone is a little bit rough. But I'd say that's a pretty decent thing to get in exchange, especially considering that you fire for 4 shots with 380 alpha. So, all things considered for me, it's a B tier. You can see that the B tier is getting kind of saturated. It's almost as if I can't decide on these tanks being great or not. But anyway, TVP. TVP is gonna be really conflicting, because in its current state, I'm gonna give it a D tier. 300 alpha, 4 shots, good mobility, very good mobility in fact, but the gun, I feel that the TVP has been over-nerfed. The fact that it's getting its 310 alpha back, great, sweet, but they're giving it another reload nerf, so it's kind of dead in the water as is, and it will still be dead in the water. This is an absolutely, like, it's a one-trick pony. You get the damage out, you can easily, like, clean up some enemies that are pretty low on health, but that is it. You have no other fallbacks because you'll be reloading for nearly half a minute. It is I would say ridiculously overnerfed. If anything, I liked it when it had its, did it ever have did it ever have 3 shots? I don't know, I might be making that up. But I always liked it before it got those silly adjustments and then those ridiculous nerfs. So, unfortunately for me, as it is right now, the TVP is a D tier. There is not really a reason to play it solo. In a platoon it works better, but not really solo. Next up we have the 60 TP, and to me the 60 TP was always kind of a bit where I may have treated it too harshly. I was always very negative on the 60 TP, but in its current state I started playing it, realized it as tungsten, and with that alpha, and in general that bizarre armor profile, where it just looks like it has a tumor on its hull. It's an A tier. It's just an A tier. It works. It works. If you hide that lower plate, which is really easy, then you have a very trollish armor profile that a lot of enemies will struggle with. That turret, very good. Especially from the front, you know, like most turrets. Anyway, it's just kind of hard to argue with this not being a good heavy tank. The thing is, it always will have weak module health, especially that ammo rack. But that's one of the very few disadvantages that you're going to have to work with on the 60 TP. Next up we have the M60. And the M60 is going to get placed alongside the Patton. Because while I have it and I haven't played it for much, it kind of performs the same. It has a slightly different armor profile because the M60 just goes for a regular upper plate, lower plate. It doesn't go for the cast bathtub like the M48 did. So in terms of armor profile, that helps it a little bit with angling. But it never really was a kind of angling monster to begin with. It's always been kind of like a hold down and pray they don't shoot your cheeks. The gun, still alright. Mobility, still alright. Gun depression, still, again, alright. The fact that it's getting the sandbag armor next patch is a bit baffling, because now it's gonna be the healthiest tit in the medium, shall we say. I played it on the open test and I just gotta say, it's a lot of health to go through, so it's still gonna be a B tier regardless. Next up, the E6, which I did not play, then the T22, which I did not play, then the XM, which again I really did not play, 906. Is it the 906? No, it's the 907. The 906 is in War Thunder. The 907 I didn't play, but I really want, so once I get the 907, I'll probably make a review on it. Then the 260, didn't play. And the 2684 I didn't play in a while, but I can easily tell you that right now it's D tier hovering around F, because unlike the Minotaur, the 268 works a little bit better. A little bit. It was ridiculously strong before the actual nerfs that it received lately, so I'm gonna say that the balance nodes that it gets are a literal nothing burger. It will not change anything about the tank, but the 2684 will basically remain this kind of steel wall that will have a surprising amount of weak points if you try and mess around with the armor profile, so as it is right now, it's a D tier for me, sorry. Next up we have the mouse, and I was really conflicted, because I was planning to place the mouse in F tier. Because I just don't like the mouse, it just does not feel consistent in any way. However, you have to consider the fact that the armor profile can work, and that it has a ridiculous amount of health. So it's gonna be a low C tier. I really hated the gun though. I still don't understand why back in the day when the first proper rebalance happened, that the mouse got like a big dispersion nerf. I still don't understand that choice. As it is right now, low C tier, it has its place in tournaments because just of the health, but I can't really say anything else that's positive about it. Then the Jagdpanzer, B tier. So the thing is with the Jagdpanzer that I think currently it's in a very solid spot. It has a relatively decent armor profile, it moves okay considering the weight, and the gun punches a lot. It's all about that gun, plus with the tungsten it punches really hard. So Wargaming has decided to give it 10 more millimeters of cheek armor in exchange for removing that kind of fine balance. I wouldn't really say the Act Panzer is quote-unquote balanced in its current state. I think if you got rid of the tungsten shells, then it would be properly balanced. But as it is right now, it's a B tier. It's an easy B tier. It's just not that consistent, you know, it's kind of that weird alpha figure where either you hit somebody for 950 or you hit them for like 730, you know, it's just kind of weird with these high caliber TDs anyway. So once it's gonna get that balance change, it's gonna go down a tier for me easily. It's just, I don't really understand why it would need a cheek buff, but here we are. This is the kind of year we're in. And thankfully we're nearing the end. Oh boy, I think we're recording for like 40 minutes now almost, so I'm sorry for the length of the video, but that's simply how it goes. So, 215B. I was going to rate the 215B very harshly. And then I started playing it, and I kind of realized, hang on. It kind of moves decently well. It's basically just like a slightly faster Conqueror in that regard. And the gun is beautiful. So it's a low B tier for me. The turret, not as good as I would hope, and the hull armor is not great nowadays. It's pretty poor, if anything. So the turret being placed at the rear helps a lot of peeking, albeit the hull armor is still gonna remain a weakness in that regard. The gun, again, beautiful. But it's not gonna be really something that I can consider bringing up a tier, or maybe even 2 right now. The gun is beautiful, so if you're all about that gun and you liked the Conqueror, you're gonna like the 215B, I'd say. It's just not a tank that I would really bring out very often in the current meta, so that's just how the cookie crumbles. Next up, we have the 405, and I don't think I'm gonna be that contentious when I say that the 405 is a D tier. So that gun, when it gets all of those shots out, really good. The problem is without the reticle cowl, it really suffers in that kind of aspect. It just does not get those shots across really well, so it's really unfortunate. It's big as a barn. Then we have the honestly quite hilarious in-house camo, so I guess Wargaming is really leaning in on that a bit. And the mobility is fine. It's just fine. It's not really anything outstanding. The thing is, the 405 is just an immediate target when it gets spotted, so it's kind of a tank that you have to play really carefully. And at that point, it just doesn't really become worth it anymore. I feel that the 405 was kind of more interesting when it had free shots, because it also had 460 alpha instead of 410, so you know, yeah. We'll have to live with it. So, as it is right now, it's in D tier. Those changes aren't gonna do it any favors. I'm gonna have another sip of coffee, excuse me. Anyway, Hori Type 3. Oh boy. Oh boy. I know some people who really despise the Hori, and I don't really understand why. For me, the Hori is a B tier. It's not a very high B tier, but it's a B tier nonetheless. The thing that you have to understand with the Hori is that it's just an absolute pen monster. Even with just running the rammer, the premium AP is enough for most things on the battlefield. So the gun really performs great in that regard, but it just does not deliver that much damage, all things considered. I do have one of my damage records on the Hori. If I recall correctly, it was 7,911, something around that ballpark. But honestly, the Hori in its current state is pretty decent. Once it gets those buffs, it will still be pretty decent, but it won't be enough to lift it up a tier. It will still remain a B tier for me. It is pretty decent in this regard. The armor profile, not great against tier 10s, but it kind of holds up against some tier 9s. The gun, again, ridiculous penetration, kind of acceptable everything else, so you know, it's kind of a TD that I can't really decide on. Nothing really dethrones the 268 in my opinion. Next up we have the 113, and I don't play the 113 much. That is just simple because I don't like it. The gun is consistent, it performs well, it has a good reload, and all the other figures are good enough. The hull armor is kind of trollish and you can actually side-scrape with it a little bit now. But that lower plate is enormous, and if you're taller than the 113, which it's a lot of tanks, really. Then that upper plate is also way easier to go through. So for me, the 113 is just a C tier. The armor does not hold up that great. The turret does. The hull doesn't. And again, with the gun, it's just kind of... yeah, I would actually play the 215B over the 113, if I'm being honest. The object 777 into didn't play. As it is right now, I still managed to ammo rack a lot of 777s, so I guess it's still kind of, you know, bizarre in that regard. And then we have the powerhouse. Yup. Lowest tier. The powerhouse, or, you know, as you might know it, the 113 GFT. Just really good in its current position. Literally the only proper weak spot that it has is the lower plate, and the fact that it still has reactive armor made it a monster in the tournament meta. So the fact that it's losing the reactive armor, I can understand. If anything, I would prefer it. It shouldn't really have reactive. It's not really a TD to put it on, or any other tank for that matter. But, if I recall correctly, it's getting an alpha buff for some reason. The gun works, the armor profile works, and the mobility is good enough. So, in that regard, in its current state, S tier. Once it's gonna get those rebalances, it's gonna be an A tier. So, you know, don't worry, I'm not trying to oversell the powerhouse here. But really, in its current state, it is a powerhouse. So if you have a couple of days left, and you kind of want to play it, give it a try, you know. Then we have the M454, which I didn't play. CS63, which, again, I didn't play, mostly because the line is garbage. The line is terrible. So, after seeing the proposed changes, all I have to say is good for you, CS63, good for you. You're not gonna be awful anymore, you're just gonna be kind of average. That's probably for the best. Then we have the VZ55, and the VZ55 is gonna be contentious. It's gonna be a C tier for me. The combat stabs are very useful on the VZ. A bit more than on the TNH, probably because the VZ just has like a bit better gun. 470 Alpha is great. The turret is good, and the upper plate is good, but the lower plate is enormous, and you have those sponsons, those, if you look at the frontal profile of the VZ55, the sponsons are basically those things that merge into the side armor. And they kind of have the side armor values, so angling is not really an option, and neither really is side scraping, so with the VZ, it's always been kind of like a niche choice. The thing is, I have talked to a couple of people, and one person in particular has noted that really the only thing that the VZ should have gotten in the balance changes was a significant weight decrease, which would mean that it would basically become more mobile in turn, and I think that would be really the only thing that the VZ needed, because it would still remain a niche heavy, but it would be interesting in that regard. It wouldn't be like... it would be kind of like, oh, it has a kind of trollish armor profile, but it moves pretty good, and the gun is alright. Instead, Wargaming has decided that when they said, oh, we want to reduce the prevalence of tier 10 autoloaders on the meta, they have decided to turn the VZ55 into a 2-shot autoloader. It's just gonna make it a better Yo. It's just gonna make it a better M6 Yo. That's it. That's what it's going to become. It's gonna become a monster. So I do not understand that choice. I don't think it should have ever gotten that autoloader. Yet, here we are. As it is right now, for me it's a C tier. It's an interesting tank to bring out every now and then, but once that patch hits, oh my god, it's gonna be a menace. So, that's basically my opinion on the VZ55. And thankfully, we only have 3 tanks left. So the E50M already A tier. In its current state, the E50M is just an unsung hero. I don't understand why it's not being played more often. The armor profile is just trollish, great mobility, good gun. So the fact that it's getting reactive armor and it's getting a side profile buff is just ridiculous to me. The E50M already performs well enough as is. I don't understand these buffs. The grill is kind of weird. The grill is kind of weird. I don't like it that much. C tier. But the gun works. The gun works really good. It's just the problem that the alpha is inconsistent, and you don't really have additional fallbacks because you're just as big as a barn. You're as big as a barn, and your camo is not that high to like get away with it a lot of the times. So the fact that the grill is getting mobility buffs is good, because that means it can actually just like pop and zoom, relocate, pop and zoom, relocate. So in that playstyle, I think it's actually going to work better than just the typical, oh, I'm gonna sit at the back of the map and I'm gonna shoot anything that pops up. I think it's gonna perform better than that, so I do appreciate those buffs coming in that might elevate it to B tier. And then we have the E100. In its current state, I'm not afraid to give the E100 an S tier. I genuinely am not afraid. The turret armor profile is trollish, especially when angling. The hull, again, we understand the massive overplate, but that one's not that weak. And the gun, the 150mm, especially right now, punches a lot. With the nerfs it's going to become an A tier. But what's really interesting to me is the fact that the 128 is going to get buffed. And it's going to get buffed to the point that it might be an interesting alternative to the 150mm. The 150mm is going to receive an alpha nerf, but it's still going to be like 660. It's not that huge of a deal. So the E100 is still going to be quite good. It's just not going to be as good, if you understand me. And that is it. So that's the whole tier list in front of you. I understand there might be a couple of tanks missing, but again, making a tier list is pretty time consuming, and I just decided to take this one. I might put it in the video description if you want to assemble one yourself. However, that is going to be it from me. Do you agree with some of these decisions? Do you disagree with some of them? How do you feel about the balancing? Let me know in the comments. That's going to be it from me. My name is Hab. You already knew that, but whatever. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. I'll catch you all later. Hopefully during an actual review, so see ya.